G'day, how you doing? Adam here from Poseidon Racing with another Zed Run update. Now, this one is probably one of the most important videos that I have created in the history of Poseidon Racing on YouTube and the history of Zed Run for that matter. I have a couple of concerns that, if not corrected ASAP, could jeopardize the future of Zed Run, or at the minimum jeopardize the rate of growth for Zed Run. Okay, there's two main issues that I've been sort of tossing over in my head for the last 2 or 3 months, getting a little bit frustrated, waiting for Zed to sort of change their roadmap and let us know that they're changing their strategy to some degree. Now, the two things, to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about, the two things that concern me the most are, number one, the beginners are not being looked after and protected and nurtured in the ecosystem. In fact, I would go as far to say as the beginners are being taken advantage of, and I'll give you some support behind that statement in a moment. And secondly, it looks like Zed Run have chosen the wrong strategy. You know, rather than going for a growth strategy, they look to be going for a early profit strategy. And I think this is a big mistake. Now, I think Zed probably knows about both of these things already and is probably already in the boardroom strategizing how to change directions for a more beginner-friendly and a better growth strategy. If we look at a game like Axie Infinity, now I'm not comparing the two, they're very, very different, but Axie Infinity has seen an explosion in growth in the last couple of months, or the last 6 months or so, and now I believe is approaching close to 1 million users, whereas Zed had a bit of an explosion early in the year where we went from a couple of thousand users out to say 50,000 or something like that, but we've been sitting in and around there for some time. We haven't seen that explosive next level of growth just yet, and I believe that's to do with both of these things that I'm talking about. Is the entry level is not very friendly for beginners. It's very, very, very difficult to sort of make any money or even break even as a beginner. And then secondly, Zed's contributing to that by, in my opinion, taking too much money out of the system at this early stage, this very vulnerable stage. Now let's touch on, I don't know whether these figures are 100% accurate. In fact, I know they're not 100% accurate. They're a bit of an estimation based on the information that I can get. But as it stands, well, before I go into the numbers, if we're going to produce a growth strategy for a game, which is generally what a lot of these brand new disruptive type technology-based companies tend to do, like Amazon and Uber, they will sacrifice profit early to build the user base and absolutely dominate the space. So they have, in many cases, an insurmountable lead in users, and it's very hard to catch up to that after that's been established. And then the profit comes later. Once you have that huge user base that is very difficult to overtake, then the profit comes later. Now, if I was a new game coming into this and saw Zed with a head start, the main thing I would be looking at is to create a more friendlier ecosystem to try and catch up and overtake Zed user base as quickly as possible. Now, I think Zed needs to change to a growth strategy to sort of protect against anyone else coming in and doing that themselves. And I'm sure they're already looking at that, particularly because they had that $20-odd million US investment. That should now free them up to switch to a more growth style strategy, whereas previously they were probably looking at more of a profit strategy because it was the most important to make sure they could keep developing. But now that they have that money locked up and their runway is somewhat guaranteed, they have that money guaranteed for the future, in my opinion, they should switch to a growth strategy. Now, if we look at how to create a more friendly growth strategy, if we look at the world economy, for example, when the world economy is in trouble, we don't raise taxes and fees and cost the general public more money. the governments tend to stimulate the economy by lowering the interest rates and even sending out money, free airdrops to everyone, if you know what I mean. Okay, now I'm not suggesting Zed needs to do free airdrops, but I think they need to look at the fees that they are currently ripping out of the system, because I don't think it's sustainable. Okay, so higher fees, higher taxes, that kind of thing is a way to stifle an economy, whereas lower fees and stimulation or stimulus is a way to grow an economy. And we need to, in my opinion, Zed really needs to look hard at switching from a profit strategy. Now they have that big investment, they can afford to switch from hopefully that profit strategy over to a growth strategy, which will then establish and to some degree keep at bay any competitors. Because if we get a competitor that comes in with an aggressive, super aggressive growth strategy, then that could be one of the biggest threats to Zed, if Zed is still sitting there with this profit type strategy. Now, I don't know the numbers around why they're doing this, and maybe the servers couldn't handle a huge explosion of growth from 50,000 to 500,000, and maybe they were stifling that growth using this sort of high fee tactic, and also at the same time that was building up the bank balance to then allow them to switch when ready into a high growth strategy. That could be something that they look at for sure. I think it's pretty important and one of the biggest threats if this continues. Now, let's have a bit of a look at some of the numbers on what fees are coming out of the Zed ecosystem. And this is month on month. This is a 30-day analysis. I don't claim these stats are 100% correct. If you know better than I do, then send me a message and I will recorrect this, but I think they're pretty close. They're somewhat estimated, but I think they're pretty close. So of course, first of all, Zed is now taking 2.5% of all sales on OpenSea. Now that equates to, that 2.5%, by my calculation, there's about 7,000 Ethereum in sales exchanging hands on OpenSea in the last 30 days, and that 2.5% equates to roughly 550,000 US dollars, just over $500,000. Now, on top of that, when we're talking about sales, OpenSea, of course, also take 2.5%. So those two combined are taking 1.1 million US dollars out of the Zed ecosystem. Now, there's not a lot we can do, or in fact, probably nothing we can do about the 2.5% from OpenSea. But the Zed 2.5% was added on, I think, only a couple of months ago. And so that's an extra 550,000 US dollars being pulled out every 30 days if that current sales volume continues. All right, then we move to breeding. Now, Zed is taking huge chunks out of breeding. If you Google Zed breeding fees or something like that, you'll see the exact numbers. But it's somewhere, I think, between 30% and 15%, depending on if you're breeding in stable or externally out of stable. So I've done those figures, and this is a real estimate. I estimated it at 20% of the total breeding fees paid. And that looks to be somewhere around 650,000 US dollars coming out of the Zed economy, again, each 30 days. All right, and then racing, the 10% rake, that adds up to another roughly 500,000 US dollars being pulled out every 30 days. So if we add those up, Zed is pulling $1.7 million out of the Zed ecosystem each month, and on top of that, there's another 550,000 US dollars coming out via OpenSea. So what's that? About 2.25 million coming out of what is a relatively small economy at the moment. So that is absolutely crazy. Now, don't get me wrong. I want Zed to be a billion, trillion dollar company and be making absolute bucket loads of money, because that means the ecosystem is healthy and doing really well. What my main concern is, though, is that Zed is currently pulling an unsustainable amount of profit out of this relatively small ecosystem, which is potentially one of the reasons or potentially stifling the growth. It's not allowing Zed to grow at an explosive rate, which I believe is important in establishing our first mover advantage. One of the biggest advantages that we have is being the first mover. One of the biggest mistakes I believe that Zed can make is not taking advantage of that by having a high growth strategy, particularly now that they have that runway and that future solidified with that $20 odd million investment from some very savvy investors. Now that is also one of the things that gives me great confidence, because those investors that invested that $20 million are going to be incredibly knowledgeable about taking advantage of being a first mover like Zed is. Okay, so I imagine in the boardrooms they're at the moment strategizing what the best growth strategy is and looking at whether it's sustainable to keep pulling out this much money each month. I would say that it's not. I don't know if my figures are 100% correct, as I said, but they look to be roughly in the ballpark, and I think it seems too much and it seems unsustainable given how small, the current economy is. Okay, now secondly, this is going to be a bit of a long video. Well, what do I think they should do? I'm not exactly sure. There's many, many ways they could go about this. One of the things that I think they could do, well, I think they're working on it anyway, but maybe reducing some of those rates temporarily to make the economy a little bit more friendly, particularly for the newer players. Like, have a look where the newer players are spending their money and reduce the rates that Zed are pulling out, particularly from that area. Number one, make it more beginner friendly. Now, number two, the second main issue that I see that is a real threat to the Zed system and the growth and the future of Zed is it is extremely unfriendly and extremely hard for beginners to make money. Most beginners are losing their money pretty quickly. And I would go as far to say as that the beginners are being taken advantage of by the bigger stables, even like myself to a degree, and Zed themselves. In other words, a lot of that money that Zed is pulling out is coming from the beginners, okay? And I'll show you what I mean by that. I've got some incredible stats here. Let's switch over to full screen. Wait 1 second. A big shout out to my stats guy, Ender's Game. He does all my stats for me, and we've got an incredible spreadsheet here. Let's switch over. Let me move myself over here. Actually, before we look at that, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this. In fact, let's move me up again. What I've got here is the Zed Run OpenSea listed at low to high. So these are the cheapest horses in the ecosystem. Let's click on a few and see what they are. This is what beginners are buying. So if we click on properties here, we have a Z25 Buterin exclusive. That's what I assume would be there. I assume it's high Z number Buterins, exclusive cross paces are the cheapest horses, roughly. What do we got here? Buterin cross Z38, yes, correct. This one's not even loaded properly yet. Can I see? I can't see what that one is. This one is Z25 Elite Buterin. Yeah, exclusive elite cross paces. That's what I would expect down low here. Properties. Okay, that's a bit of a better one. A legendary Z17. That might not be for sale for too much longer once I finish and load this video. In fact, it probably won't be there by that stage anyway. But I think that's probably a pretty good buy if you are a beginner looking into this. Z20 exclusive Finny. Okay, there's a slightly different one. And that might be a decent buy as well. Maybe it is a colt. Buterin Z28. Yeah, so most of these are high Z number Buterins. What's this one, or was that the one? Buterin Z18 Elite. This one. Again, so, 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 are sort of these Buter and high Z numbers, you know, above 25 Z numbers in elites, exclusive, cross. I don't know what paces go for, but, you know, if we come down here, is it sort of sticking to that pattern? No, it's a legendary Buter, and okay, that's probably not a bad one either. All right, okay. So with that in mind, let's come back to my Excel sheet here. And what I want to show you, what I want to highlight is how unfriendly the system currently looks for entry-level horses and beginners, okay? And this is a really big problem, because if the majority of the beginners come in, buy their first horse, lose a bunch of money and don't buy another horse and leave the game, we're not going to see that growth. We need the beginners to be nurtured so that they come in, they make a little bit of money, they tell their friends, this is great, it's a lot of fun, I made $20 yesterday, I made $100 this week, it only cost me $300 to get in. Now I know everyone can't make money, but it needs to be more friendly for the beginners. Currently it's significantly tilted in the other direction. It's more friendly for the higher level horses than it is the entry level horses. Now what I've got here, let me give you some background here. What I've got on screen is horses over the last 30 days that made their race debut and have raced between 6 and 20 paid races. All right, so 6 isn't very many. 20 is starting to get some experience, but this is kind of the beginner area. We could look at between 1 and 5. We might do that in a minute as well, but 6 to 20 is sort of just getting in there. If you're a beginner, bought your first horse, you're probably going to run 6 races. You know, they might just be $2.50 cheap races, but you're probably going to run 6 to 20 races, I would think, just to get a bit of a feel for it. By the time you get to 20, if you've lost most of your dough, you might be thinking of giving it away. All right, and that's where it needs to be more friendly. Now I've sorted this data based on paid ROI percentage, okay? So these are all 0%, so they're not making any money. Now what I find interesting, as we come down this list, we're going to look at the horses that have big numbers, okay? As we come down. So there are Nakamoto Cross, there's 9 of those in the last 30 days that made their race debut and have had more than 6 races but less than 20 and have not profited, okay? But as we come down, we see these big numbers. Z22 Buter and Cross, 31 of them, likely to be beginners, 0% ROI positive after 6 to 20 races. Now this will improve as we go down, but look at the big numbers. Let's look for another big number. Okay, we got Finney Cross, Z29, 0 at 13 of those. Again, they're likely to be beginners, probably. Buter and 20 Z29s, these are the ones we're looking at, the cheapest horses in the system. Again, they only made their race debut in the last 30 days, raced between 6 and 20 races, 15 of those, 0%. Here we go, Buter and again, 21 of them, Z30 crosses, 0%. Here we go, 19, Buter and Cross, Z32, 0%. This is a lot of beginners. If it's all Buterans, we've got 19, 21, that's 40, 55, you know, that's 86. If these are all going to beginners, that's 86 beginners that are just getting dominated. Okay, let's keep scrolling down. Buteran, another 15, 0%. Buteran, 25, exclusive, Z36, 25 of those, 0%. Buteran, elite, 36, there's 12 of them, 0%. Again, another reasonably big number. Buteran, Z40, elite, 11, 0%. All right, let's just do over 10s. What else? Scrolling down, scrolling down. Okay, that's all right. Here we go. Oh, we're getting into some profit. All right. Buteran, Z38, exclusive, 27 of them in the ecosystem. One of them is in profit. One of the 27 is in profit. Like there's 26 more of those that beginners have probably picked up, not in profit. Okay, Finneys, again, Finney Z20, mainly beginners again. We got Buteran exclusives. Again, only one of them out of 24 in profit. Buteran Pacers, 68 of them, only 3 out of 68 in profit. That's a lot of beginners that are just struggling. Okay, look at these numbers, and they're all mainly beginner horses. Zabos, okay, they might not be beginner horses, okay, but the rest of these probably are. Those Zabos are probably not beginner again. All right, but Finnies and Buterin, Finny, Buterin. You know, there's huge numbers here. All right, here's a really big area. Z29, Buterin exclusive. So that's a Buterin bred with a Buterin and then bred with a Buterin. So this is where the beginners are playing in the breeding stakes, and this is where the beginners are buying in the racing stakes. You've got 126 here. Only 10 of that 126 has been profitable, 8%. 92% of these horses are not ROI positive after between 6 and 20 races. All right, and this trend, we'll have a look in a moment, I guess. Well, what I can tell you is this trend gets better as you go up in races, but it's not necessarily better because beginners are pretty smart. After 20 races and they're losing money, they stop racing and the ROI starts going up because between 20 and 50 races, for example, most of the loser horse, well not most, a lot of the loser horses start coming out of the ecosystem. But there's still a lot of people losing even more money, you know, by the time you get up in race counts. All right, but look at, it's all beginner horses down here that are really struggling after between 6 and 20 races. These are coming into the system. Now, if we scroll down to the other end, what's doing really well? Now, this is interesting, isn't it? These are not really beginner horses. A Z5 Finny Genesis is probably going for about 1.5 ETH, is it? Where are we? Let's see what they are worth. Now this data, you need to be a bit careful with this data. It's not suggesting that all Z5 Finnies are monsters. It's just that I guess they're probably coming into a friendly class system with a lot of these other donkeys. So they're looking pretty good early days. But in saying that, what are they worth? They're probably not the beginner level horse. Price low to high. Oh, I need to click Genesis. Yeah, about 1/8. Okay, about 1/8. A lot of people are considering these horses to be very good value at the moment, and it looks like they're fitting into the race system pretty well. Okay, particularly early days, you got 36% that are profitable with more than 6 paid races and less than 20. I got my doubts whether that is sustainable, but it's very interesting. Now, there's also some interesting things going on here too. A Z10 Buterin Legendary. Look at this. Again, we need to look at this data month on month, but if you are a beginner looking to get in a Z10 Buterin Legendary, that means it's a Buterin that's been bred with a Nakamoto, because you can only get a 10 via a 10 Legendary if you breed a Buterin 8 with a Z2 Nakamoto or a Buterin 9 with a Z1. All right, there's been 175 of those produced, and they are early days profitable at 36%. So they are performing very well. Okay, so this kind of knowledge can give you beginners out there a little bit of an advantage as to where you potentially would be better off spending your money early days. Now, if we come back here, but in saying that, I would like Zed to try and look at some solutions to make the entry-level horses a little bit more competitive than what they currently are, because as we just went through, as we just saw in the last 10 minutes, they're getting absolutely dominated, most of them. All right, let's have a look. If we go, let's change this over now to Buterin. Breed type, no, I don't want Genesis, I want Legendary. And I want genotype. 5 on here. What did we say? 10. How cheap are these? Now keep in mind the cheapest Buterins before when we looked were about 0.035, I think. So for roughly 3 times that, well, this might be run. You might want an unraced one. But even though these are 3 or 4 or 5 times as expensive, they're performing significantly better, okay, in the system. All right, we know the Z1s and 2s are performing pretty well. That's to be expected. Finny Legend, Z10 Legendary, again, performing very, very well. So if you can maybe save your dollars and maybe enter at that level, not financial advice, but it's looking like that is a better entry level. Finny exclusive Z11, okay. Buterin Cross. Now, what is different about this is look how low that Z number is for a Buterin Cross. Now, breeding goes Genesis, that is the original unbred level. Then if we go 1 generation, you're going to get Legendary. 2 generations, you'll get Exclusive. 3 generations, you'll get Elite. And the 4th generation, you get Cross. So this horse here is, where are we? There's not a lot of them, but it's 4 generations in and a Z18. Now, if you were to go 4 generations in of just breeding Z10s, you'd get to Z40, okay? So this is a horse that has a bit of a combined bloodline in there. It might have some Nakamoto, it might have some Zabo, it could have some Finny, but it's also got some Buterin. They're performing very, very well. So what is the difference between the horses, the entry-level horses that are performing badly on percentage, is that they're high Z number Buterin and probably contain a lot more Buterin purebred genetics, all right? But once you start getting that lower Z number Buterins, they seem to be performing better. Here we go again, Z11 Buterin. Again, this is a high likelihood that it has Nakamoto blood in it or Zabo. It's actually 100% that it has either, because if you have a Z8, you can only get to 11 by combining with a Z3 Zabo. And if you have a Z9, you can only get there by combining a Z2 Nakamoto. And of course, if you've got a 10, you can combine with a Z1 Nakamoto. And early days, it looks very favourable for this style horse, okay, in the system. Again, Z12 Finny, 518, performing very well in where they are slotting into the class system, early days. Again, the low Buterin Legendary, very, very good. Low Buterin Elite. I would say for a Buterin to be under Z20 and be, you know, an exclusive or elite is suggesting that it's been bred with some higher bloodlines or some higher breed types. All right, so this is really, really interesting. So for the beginners out there, you know, if you're going, look for your Buterins with a low Z number. So if we say Buterin Legendaries, you know, below Z13s, or even Buterin Exclusives below Z15s and Buterin Elites below Z, and this is not perfect science, this is just me looking at the data right now and making some assumptions, but Buterin Elites below, you know, 20. So if you said, okay, Buterin Legendaries below 13 or 14, Buterin Exclusives below 15, 16, Buterin Elites below 20. If you can snag some really low floor-based Buterins around there, let's have a look. Let's see what they are. So what did we say? Let's have a look at Legendaries first. What did I say? Buterin, yes. Breed type, Legendary, yes. And let's say below 13s or 14s. So let's go 10s. Don't want 9s, but 11s, 12s, 11s, 12s, 13s. You know, there's probably in that range. Let's have a look at the prices. Look at this. Now, you do have to be careful and check that they have or haven't been raced, because what we're looking at here is the data of the overall percentages. You know, Buterin 11s, 29% are doing pretty well early days. Buterin Legendary 12s, 28% there. Where's Buterin Legendary 13s? Here they are, also doing reasonably well. Okay, but if you look at these horses and they're super cheap, they might have run a couple of races and been $40 odds or very high odds. So you can't really assume that if you buy a very high odds horse that it's going to fit into the 24% or 25% of this category. You either need to keep your eye out for one that's odds are looking pretty nice, or maybe buy an unraced one and you've got roughly a 1 in 4 chance of it maybe being okay. All right? Whereas, as I said before, you know, if you come right back up here and look at, where's some big numbers here? Let's come to the first big number that we coming down from the top. 68's pretty big. Buterin Pacer, you know, only running at 4.4%. Where's the first over 100? Here we go. Buterin exclusive. As I said, you want to keep those exclusives. What did I say? I think I said under about Z15 for them to be, you know, reasonable. Once you start getting up, look what happens. You know, only 8%. So you've got a 92% chance that this horse is going to struggle in the current system. Now, with that being said, let's switch back to full screen here. With that being said, what are some solutions? Well, number one, for beginners, absolutely. Hopefully you're watching this video and you now have much more knowledge about buying the floor, buying the really cheap horses and what to look for. You know, keep your eye. That Z number looks to be absolutely imperative. So if you can get a low Z Buterin, which the market is not appreciating, they're not appreciating that Nakamoto blood, that Szabo blood into the Buterin, and it looks to be significantly improving on top of a Buterin breed as opposed to a Buterin Nakamoto breed, which still is a Buterin, but it looks to be performing significantly better. Okay, so arm yourself with that information. Hopefully you now understand where the value might be contained in these entry-level horses. And number two, Zed, look at this. Can we get some sort of soft entry level for these Buterin donkeys? All right, the beginners are buying these Buterin donkeys that are, you know, at the worst case scenario, you know, I think we can probably count up to almost 500 horses here. You know, if we start counting all these low Buterins, you know, these bigger numbers, 31. Let's do it just quickly. 15 is 46. 21 is going to test me. 67 are we up to? Another 20 on that is 87, 86. Roughly 100 there, 101 in fact. 126, 138. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but let's go. 149. There's another one, 158. Let's just count the ones over 10. Getting low here. 158. Buterin. 100 and, well, let's add another 30 on there roughly. 185 roughly. Getting up to 200 there. Getting up to 270. Nearly 300. 340. 370. So by the time we get up to 500 horses here, and these 500 would all be beginner horses, you'd be probably sitting at roughly about 6%, 7%. So of those 500 beginner horses that are almost certainly going to stables that have one horse or maybe up to 2 or 3 and are really, really struggling, of those 500 horses that have entered the system in the last 30 days only, roughly 6% of them are going to be somewhere ROI positive, and the other 94% are losing money. All right, so we need to address that with some sort of Buterin league, even if we say it's restricted to horses with a Z number, you know, let's say they've got to be Z number above 30, you know, some sort of league like that, because that seems to be really, really important in the current ecosystem. Buta and Z30 or greater, let's have some sort of round robin league where you can come in, put your horse in cheap for $5, you get 20 races, the prize money has a really big spread, you get to get some knowledge about your horse really, really cheaply, and number one, the main priority, you know, 94%. We can't have 94% or 95% of new players losing money in their first 30 days. Okay, that is just absolutely tragic and doesn't point to high growth. We need these beginners to come in and say, look, yes, I won $10 today, I won $100 this week, or I won $50 this week. My horse cost me $500, I should have it paid back in a couple of months. That needs to be the story of the majority of players, in my opinion. Maybe not for the entire future, but at least to start growing and make sure, this is the number one point, make sure Zed takes advantage of being the first mover. Doesn't just sit back on 50,000 stables and say, well, geez, we've done well, pat ourselves on the back there, whilst another game comes in with a really beginner-friendly game and goes up to 50 and up to 500,000 in the blink of an eye before we even know what's happened. That is the big concern. That is the threat to Zed. Let's look after the beginners. Let's make sure of that. Let's make sure, and it's mainly racing, because beginners come in, where are they cutting their teeth? They're cutting their teeth on racing. They're enjoying racing, but it's not very enjoyable when you keep buying these entry-level horses and they keep losing races. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Zed is watching this. Share it with the beginners. Share the video with your beginner friends. If you agree, drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching along. See you next time. Bye for now.